This video is going to be a little controversial, and I expect this will challenge a good amount of people. However, in fairness to me and others, the only thing I ask is that if you decide to comment below, do it only after watching the full video and hearing my finished thoughts that I share. Many of you most likely saw my video recently in which I challenged my cousin Aaron to capture better wildlife photos than me with an inexpensive budget setup, even though he had no prior skill in wildlife photography. In that video, we had a great time. However, one such situation occurred that threw me for a loop. The location that we were going to was an irregular spot of mine, located about 4 hours away from my house in crowded Southern California. At this location, people were flocking all around us due to such activity. The birds were amazingly comfortable with people, and as seen in the video, one such pair of geese even walked up straight towards Aaron while shooting, and pretty much every other species seemed to not mind our presence at the very least. At the end of our outing, I realized that I hadn't gotten photos of a tree swallow in a while, and I snagged my camera back from Aaron to attempt to capture a few images for about 30 minutes roughly before we left that location. There were tree swallows swarming the area, and I found a certain pair patiently resting along a snag off the dirt pathway not more than about maybe 5 or so feet away from the people walking right by it, super close to all the traffic. The angle that was closest to them right off the path was not a good one, however, since it was cluttered and had bad side lighting, so instead I tried to work my way around to a front-lit shot further down the path. But before I knew it, I was capturing shots of the tree swallow undisturbed, as it was preening and calling out towards its buddies and having a great time. In this process of repositioning, I came to realize I had stepped slightly off the designated path when a lady came up beside me, frustrated that I was threatening the bird's existence. Now, let me explain. Firstly, I was only about a single 3-foot step off the designated path boundaries, and I just slightly stepped off that path into a step of dirt and damaged no plant life whatsoever in the process. Secondly, I was incredibly careful and slow in my approach, and this is evident by the tree swallow remaining still and allowing me to photograph it for 5 or so minutes. I was undisturbing in my whole wildlife photography process. Now, thirdly, I was further placed from the tree swallow at the angle that I was at, as opposed to the people who were walking directly next to it on the beaten path. So, in other words, I was further away and less disturbing than the majority of people that were around me that day. So, back to the angry lady. This lady approaches me and says, "Wow, this tree swallow has come a far way." And so, thinking she was trying to make conversation with me, I respond to her in a friendly way, "Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?" But now the tables turn, and really weirdly, her tone changes towards anger and like this extreme sassiness and says, "Are you illiterate?" And I was just confused. So I ask her what she means, and she quickly goes on to talk about how there are signs all around saying not to go off the beaten path, and how me doing so has just spent this tree swallow's energy, this precious energy of the tree swallow, and possibly killed it. And in the process, she winds up flailing her arms around and storms off into the distance with a loud voice right by the tree swallow and literally scares the tree swallow off. The very thing she was criticizing me for doing that I wasn't doing and trying to keep from happening, she wound up doing herself. So I talk about all this to kind of, I guess, bring up the point of wildlife photography ethics. I talk a lot about the importance of being ethical in wildlife photography. In fact, this Friday, I'll be bringing on Alicia Smith to the podcast to have a conversation revolving around wildlife photography ethics. But I think there are 2 main points to take away from this situation to help balance out our views as a culture. So, number 1, legalism isn't the answer. So what do I mean by that? Legalism is a very familiar term, maybe in religion, that people are learning to balance out over the past few decades. Yet, in wildlife photography, we seem to be unaware of the problem this causes within our own culture and community. When we believe in strict rules that are incapable of adapting to any scenario, we remove any sort of variation in situational responses. And in this specific situation, I knew these tree swallows were incredibly human-friendly. I was reading its body language the whole time during my approach, and I knew that it was not going to flush as I approached it, then took the shots that I was wanting to get. In regards to stepping off the beaten path, I was hyper aware during my approach to not only make sure I wasn't disturbing the birds, but also to make sure that I wasn't stepping over any environmental objects that would harm nature, such as plants or other types of foliage, right? So therefore, stepping off the beaten path in this scenario did not harm any animal or plant in the process and did no damage to nature. Here's the thing though, not only does legalism strip any recognition of variables in a situation like this, but it also often causes for a lack of grace for those trying to enforce the rules, which leads me into kind of this next point that I want to share. So point number 2 is that when we value rules over caring for people, then people, and in turn nature, get sacrificed. Now, what do I mean by that? Imagine if instead of me, it was my cousin who was a first timer doing wildlife photography, and he was excited to interact with nature and get to kind of have this intimate moment with it. If it was me, I would want nothing to do with the culture that yells at me for doing something as small as stepping 3 feet off a beaten path onto a patch of dirt. I mean, it might have left a bad taste in my mouth, and which would discourage me from ever wanting to do it again and get out and observe nature in the same way. This, in turn, not only affects humanity, but also affects nature, because now this individual who is put down is less involved in getting to know nature. And when you have little drive towards knowledge of something, you no longer know how to care for it, or even want to care for it often. So in religion, legalism is kind of seen as this huge driving force and why people nowadays want nothing to do with it. However, when it happens in wildlife photography, we call it good and necessary. So let's tack on one more point. For those of you who believe that you're innocent and just because you haven't killed a bird in a while out doing wildlife photography, you're the best of the best. Let's just take birds as an example. The leading 3 causes of bird death are habitat loss, feral cats, and collisions. Let's start at the bottom. An estimated 250,000 birds are killed by vehicle collisions each year, and over 500,000 birds are killed by building window strikes each year. If you live in a house or if you drive a car, your chances of killing a bird are extremely higher than that of doing wildlife photography. Personally, I've accidentally hit a bird while driving. I've also seen 2 birds hit my own windows of my house and die in the process. Sadly, very sadly. And this is not something that brings me joy, but it's a reality of living in the society and the culture that we do live in. Yet, even more importantly, habitat loss is dramatic in its effect towards wildlife. The mere act of you eating a lot of the foods that you like to eat and supporting farming that causes the loss of habitat for many different types of species, the materials involved in the products you buy that destroy these habitats, all these different things that we do indirectly support the loss of habitat to one extent or another, therefore supporting the loss of bird life. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that almost all of us fall into one of these 2 categories, most likely both of these 2 categories, resulting in much higher death numbers than we would ever cause while out in the field doing wildlife photography. Not to be depressing, but I would argue to say that not a single one of us that follows this channel is perfect and innocent of affecting wildlife. So when addressing issues of wildlife photography ethics, we have to learn not to shame and put down others publicly for a different perspective than us. As humanity, we have to learn to resolve our differences over mature conversation and openness to different and other perspectives. And realize that we are no more holy or better than anyone else that's on a different part of their journey than you are. Before I go, I just want to bring it around to one last point. None of this is me saying that there is license to harm. Just because we fought our way out from legalism and cancellation doesn't mean that we should fight our way into lawlessness and doing whatever the heck we want. It's important to keep each other personally accountable in a gentle and approachable manner and to care for nature in the best way possible. The problem with the lady who approached me wasn't the fact that she was trying to approach me, but it was the shameful and the really angry way that she did it, and the fact that she actually caused more damage in the process of her trying to keep me in check. When I'm out, I do make it a goal never to flush an animal, and I'd say I'm actually pretty successful most of the time. This doesn't mean that I'm perfect, but I try my best, and in ways of lifestyle which are even more important, I try to avoid using single-use plastics, or I eat much less meat than I used to before. All these things are attempts to care for nature in ways that I hadn't before, and as I've grown in my love for nature throughout the years, so has my behavior. None of that could have happened if I didn't even get started caring for it. While I could keep talking about this for quite a while to come, I'm going to leave that up to my guest Alicia Smith, who's coming on the podcast this Friday. So make sure you subscribe below to hear that episode on kind of the flip side of wildlife photography ethics and how we can responsibly care for nature. So I hope you guys enjoyed, got some value out of the video. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before my birthday, a little bit less than a month from now. So if you like this video, if you think there's value on this channel, I'd really appreciate if you shared it with a friend so we could hit our 1,000 subscriber goal within the month. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.